Well, good evening, Internet, and as always, I hope this finds you well. And this, well, 'tis the season, or, well, it will be the season by the time you're watching this. I suspect this video may have something of a long edit lead time. We're getting a bit ambitious tonight, and I'm doing, for the first time ever, an actual Christmas song lesson. I know. So what better song to start off with, of course, Whamageddon, Last Christmas. We're going to look at this in 4 different layers, if you like. We're going to start with the absolute beginners, just playing open chords and simple rhythms. So if you've done the Start Playing Now course, you'll be perfectly able to cope with everything there. Then we're going to move to a slightly higher ability level, get used to bar chords and things like that. Then we're going to move on to a rock version, where we're going to see how we can do a power chord approach to the rhythm part, and we'll tackle the vocal melody and some of the other parts as well. And then we're going to finish off with a full-blown acoustic fingerstyle version where we're incorporating melody and harmony into everything. You have to pardon me for being less than festive now, because this itches like all fury. So let's start off with absolute beginners. So first thing you're going to need to do is go onto YouTube and find Wham! Last Christmas in standard tuning, because as it turns out, the original of this song is recorded pitched somewhere in between D flat and D. So save your sanity, hop onto YouTube and search for Wham! Last Christmas standard tuning. There's a whole bunch of different versions on there where people have moved it up to be in the key of D, which is where we're going to learn it today. Now, we're going to start with the absolute beginner, capo on the 2nd fret, and we're going to play the chords of C, A minor, D minor, and G. And as always, the first thing to do is just get used to these chords, pick your way around them. And we're looking to have 2 bars, so that's 2 blocks of 4 beats on each chord. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 on the C, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 on the A minor, and so on. And we're going to be playing these with an 8th note rhythm, although do feel free to vary this as you get more comfortable with it. We'll start with just a straight up 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and for those of you who haven't followed the beginner's course, well, obviously shame on you. But an 8th note, also known as a quaver, means we're playing 2 notes to beat. So rather than counting 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and so that's going to give us this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you get more comfortable with playing that, you can introduce some gaps into the rhythm. To do that is simply moving my hand away from the strings, still doing every downbeat with a downstroke, every upbeat with an upstroke, but just simply not hitting the strings. And just to prove that I'm not lying to you, let's pop the track on, have a little bit of a strum along. And that's literally it. It's just those 4 chords, that same chord structure all the way through. Proof positive that you don't have to write a complicated song to write a classic song. Okay, so beginners, we'll leave you there. You guys, off to bed. Santa will be there soon before you know it. Just one more sleep. Right, now we've packed the beginners off to bed. Let's put this into regular key, and let's start looking at the actual chord sequence behind this. So we're going to need a D, to a B minor, to an E minor, A. Now, if you're familiar with the theory behind these kind of things, you might recognise this chord sequence as a 1, 6, 2, 5 chord sequence. If you're not familiar with it, it doesn't really matter, you can play it anyway. I would suggest just taking a moment to go around the chords, again picking them, let your fingers get used to where they're going. If you need to, put a little bit of extra time into that D to B minor change. If you're not too familiar with bar chords, you're going to find that you need a different thumb position. The thumb needs to come much more around the back and the underside of the neck to get the bar chord cleanly. So a little bit of extra time put into that D to B minor change will bring dividends. But as for strumming, it's exactly the same as we did earlier. It's just an 8th note rhythm with some variations to taste, really. So that's going to give us this. And now let's try that with the track. Once again, just following that same 4 chord sequence all the way through. D to 1, B minor to 6, E minor to 2, A to 5, 2 bars on each one. So, if you're an electric player and you're looking to or impress a particularly fetching elf, well, yes, you absolutely can simply chug on the capital. And that's going to give you, the chord sequence, but let's be honest, it doesn't really sound like anything particularly impressive at this point. So let's start taking a look at how we can put the melody. What's interesting is that the melody does start on the E over the D chord, so we're actually starting on the 2nd. That's quite impressive because those non-chord tones are a bit of a sod to pitch, so kudos to George Michael there. What I'll do then is just play through the melody straight, and then we'll look at some different ways we can articulate that melody. Our chorus, and if we look at ways to articulate that, well, one thing you'll notice me doing is every time I was finishing a phrase, I'm trying to give that note some vibrato. So what is vibrato? Well, what we're trying to do here is emulate a singer when they hold a note. And we're doing that picking it up and then applying a series of small bends to that to help sustain it. So we're bending Now, vibrato is a simple technique, but it's very, very hard to master, and I have done a couple of videos on vibrato, and I will undoubtedly do more, as it's a pet subject of mine. But that is the gist of what you're aiming to, applying a series of small bends. I will give a couple of tips on vibrato. Don't immediately vibrato a note after you've hit it. What you do is hear a slightly sharp note. You want to hit your note, then apply a bit of vibrato, and then as the note naturally decays, that's where you can get more violence with it. And it's a great way of making a note sound more deliberate. Now, what we're going to do now is the next approach that we'll take after vibrato is we'll try some slides into just sort of, we often think of as greasing the notes. And what I'm going to do is slide into the start of the phrase. You can hear that makes it a little bit more vocal, a little bit more natural sounding. We can also try bending. Anytime we've got two notes that are a tone or so, or semitone away from each other, we can try that. And I can try connecting those notes up with a hammer-on or a pull-off. So that is, if you're not familiar with that, a hammer-on is where I pick the first note in the sequence, and then simply bring my finger down onto the higher note in the sequence, as opposed to, and the pull-off is doing the opposite. So I have both notes lined up, pick the higher note, and that's going to give me a slightly more liquid, flowing sound, often referred to as legato. What we'll do now is we'll play through a chorus and a hook and a verse, and I'm going to be using a little mix of all of those articulation techniques to make the whole thing sound a little bit more guitar-y. Interesting point to take away from that, actually, looking at these elements. So over the E minor chord we've got this thing happening. A, F sharp, E. That's actually like a G major 9 arpeggio. 9, 7, 6. And then over the A we have So That's giving me an A9 arpeggio. So actually, there's some quite sophisticated stuff going on in the backing that you can always nick. With regard to the melody, we're starting off basing it around seconds. So over the D, for example, playing mostly in E, before going mainly into basing it around thirds, and then over the A, bringing a little bit of the fourth to get a kind of A sus4, A resolution there. Right, let's move on to stage 4. And this is where we're going to put it all together, and we are going to play a full-on acoustic version involving fingerstyle, chords and rhythm all together. So, no magic really going on here. What we're doing is setting up an 8th note groove. 1 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And what I'm doing here is playing the root of the chord on the 1, 2, 3, 4 with the thumb, pulling the rest of the chord on the offbeat, and you hear I'm getting a little bit of the Nuno Betancourt slap there on beats 2 and 4 where the snare drum would be, if obviously budgets allowed us to hire a drummer. And then what we're trying to do is simply maneuver the notes of the melody so we can put them inside a chord voicing. So here, for example, on the initial bar, my first note is an E, so what I can do is modify my D chord to involve that open high E string note. And then the B minor. And here I'm getting that C sharp, D, C sharp, B idea simply by turning my B minor, involving the second there, the C sharp on the B string. And then for the E minor, I'm getting my F sharp there, just on that high E string. Thankfully over the A is playing all chord tones, so we can just stick to an open A. And then we go into the verse. I'm not going to belabor this too much because you're all going to be looking at the tab, and quite rightly so. But one thing that I would say is absolutely crucial is first do set up your basic groove with just the chords and sing the part to yourself. Don't sing it out loud. In fact, if you, like anything like me, if you do try and sing it out loud, then mobs will come after you with the pitchforks and burning torches. But what that's going to do is give you a really good sense of where in the bar those notes should fall. And then just take it simply bar by bar. Sing the melody to yourself as you're putting the chord groove together. It's remarkable how intuitive this kind of thing can be if you can see your melody within the chord, if you can get a nice simple chord groove going that's not overly complicated. You're laying a foundation for more complicated stuff later, and then you can simply weave the melody notes into the chord. So I'll play you out with a little bit of the fingerstyle version, play it over the track, and I think all that remains is to wrap this up before I waffle and wish you all Merry Christmas.